So there are some other ways that they shape the conversation. The stuff that I think is most familiar to us is things like Measure B, right? These big political fights that some people put a lot of money towards, people like these guys. And I wanted to show you like how I think it's easy not to notice that these folks that fund things like Measure B, that are pushing these pension attacks, they all have really similar backgrounds. John Arnold has given almost $30 million towards trying to attack pensions in California, especially. He was behind Measure B. He was a hedge fund manager, and he was also a trader at Enron, which Enron, by the way, was sued by its retirees successfully. Michael Moritz also funds attacks on pensions in the Bay Area, funds all of this anti-pension research. He's a VP at a venture capital firm. Just another example, this guy, he writes all of these op-eds for the San Francisco Examiner, and he always presents himself as like a concerned father and voter who's just really worried about the looming pension crisis in San Francisco. The pension in San Francisco is actually in excellent shape. They're 87% funded. There's no looming crisis on the horizon. And this guy used to manage a $3 billion global hedge fund, which he never really brings up in any of these articles. But again, it's just overwhelmingly the same people coming from the same places. So connecting it back to San Jose and how this plays out here, there's a few other mechanisms that they've used to try to wage this fight on pensions and to try to change the narrative in their favor. One is that after these municipal defaults like Stockton started happening, the financial industry started lobbying really heavily for a change in the accounting rules that local governments use. And eventually they were successful in getting what is known as GASB 68 and GASB 67. The GASB is the Government Accounting Standards Board. It's this third-party actor that comes up with accounting standards that are used by most governments. And what they wanted to do, what the financial industry wanted to do, was to get total pension liabilities that might be owed out over the course of 30 years to appear on a government's balance sheet in total. So like, imagine that. This is like, you know, it might be billions of dollars that are owed out for decades, but to have that all of a sudden appear as an expense on your balance sheet. It's a way of creating an artificial crisis. And they were successful. They got these rules in place. There were some local governments tried to fight back, but the financial industry ultimately won out. And this is what happened. This is the net position for the city of San Jose. Net position is like your overall assets versus liabilities for the entire city. And so they started pushing for this in 2012, the same year that Stockton went into bankruptcy. It gets implemented in San Jose in 14-15, and all of a sudden go down $2 billion in your net position. To give you some context, when the recession hit hardest in 2011, net position was still around $5 billion. So it created the sense that this was a crisis bigger than the recession. And it's also not a coincidence that when these things start to go into effect, this is when Measure B happens, right? This is when folks like, when you have the wrong people in power, we had Chuck Reed as the mayor, all of a sudden they're concerned, what's going to happen to our credit rating? What is Wall Street going to think of us if now we have to put all of our pension liability on our like balance sheet? So how do we eliminate pensions? Like, how do we do their bidding? That's why Measure B happens. That's why you also get statewide pension reform, which actually I think PEPRA was a good form of pension reform that didn't cut benefits but made pensions more sustainable. It was a political choice at the end of the day, whether or not folks decided to go the route of cutting benefits and going back on promises, or making pensions a sustainable benefit. And in this case, Chuck Reed and folks like him were gesturing towards investors saying, we're willing to do your bidding, we're on your side. And I also wanted to show this to you guys, because in order to do this, in order to make these pension cuts happen, to try to orchestrate them, the city actually invested a lot of money in trying to design this stuff. What they did is they're actually they're adopting a strategy or a tactic that was used by the private sector when they undermined pensions and when they started to attack unions, which is that they hired consultants, anti-union consultants, to come in and design concessions, push concessions, and design pension reform. So we went through and did a search of public records and found that the city spent around $7.2 million in legal fees in order to orchestrate Measure B and to try to get pension concessions from folks here. This used to be, for decades, this was common in the private sector and used to be rare here, but now it's becoming more normal. And just one example, some of these folks, some of these attorneys that they hired were paid $350 an hour to design Measure B. So that's the depressing stuff, but we also know that we fought back. That unions were able to file a lawsuit and block Measure B from happening. We were able to block a really draconian form of pension reform in San Francisco. So far, we've won, right? And the continued existence of our pension fund is a testament to how strong we are. And ultimately, we're saying that we don't have to transition to this world where retirement is only for the rich and where most people have to work for the rest of their lives. So in the next presentation, we're going to talk about some of the things that we can actually do here in San Jose to try to be more proactive in pushing back on this message and pushing back against Wall Street, because they're not going to go away. This is going to be a continued fight. And I think that unions, ultimately the public will be on our side if we go out and communicate with them. And if we stay strong, we'll continue winning. We just have to be vigilant. So that's all I have. Now I can open it up for questions.